Hello and welcome to this very special show here on CNBC-TV18. My guest today, in his own words, he says he's had two careers, one as a co-founder of one of the world's most valuable companies and a co-chair of one of the world's largest social foundations. He really needs no introduction. My guest is Bill Gates. You know, the overwhelming economic discourse in India so far has been how we need to focus on structural reforms to grow and ensure that long-term economic growth remains intact. But you've made an interesting point today in the article that was published in the newspaper that apart from structural reforms, countries also need to invest in fundamental reforms, especially healthcare and nutrition. Talk to me a little about this.
Well, the countries that have moved up to the full middle income level, which India has that potential, they've really invested in human capital. And that's got two aspects. One is the health aspect, including nutrition and other health interventions to make sure that this young group of people develop their full physical and mental capacities. And then, of course, education. And you can't do it without both of those things. And so part of the Gates Foundation role in India is where the government has ambitious goals about nutrition and health.
Yes.
We want to help accelerate that. It will require some increased investment. It'll require some reform. But that's the area we contribute to.
No, absolutely. In fact, an interesting point you made was about how 40% of China's economic growth has been on the back of the investments they've made in healthcare. And considering that India has lagged behind historically, and we are now trying to sort of do the catch-up on this front, do you think that is sort of reducing India's potential for higher growth?
Oh, absolutely. The human capital it's pretty basic. It's very healthy people getting a strong education, and then a market system that's trusted and works well. And if you look at the nutrition figures, you can say right now the quality of the work, the investment level just isn't achieving what needs to be done. Now, fortunately, we have the benefit of improved science that's showing us how to make these better vaccines, better nutrition at lower and lower costs. So I'm hopeful. I think India will seize upon this because human capital is what this country is all about.
What seems to be the problem, sir? Because your team in India may have briefed you. The fact is, India and the government is now trying to double their healthcare spend. But the numbers that you've quoted in your article today are quite staggering when you look at the malnutrition number. And importantly, you've drawn a correlation between these numbers and the productivity. Because obviously, you cannot have a productive workforce if a percentage of our adult population are malnourished. What seems to be the problem? Is it just a case of lack of funds?
Well, we need to improve the quality of how the money is spent. But there is progress. I'd say the trend there is very positive. The one place that things have been slow is actually getting it up as a percentage of GDP, although politicians have talked about doubling it, getting up to something like a 3% level. As yet, that hasn't happened. Now, a little bit it's chicken and egg. Until we get the quality there, people are saying, should we increase it? And so, we need to have good pilot programs. We need to show that things like digitally empowered workers, that the quality of execution is even better than it's been. I do think health is being discussed more now. The fact that the nutrition figures really lag where India should be, given its economic growth. People are finally talking about that. And so I'm hopeful that this will become a priority, both to get the public sector to do its part, but also for a lot of the health activities to get things like insurance so that the out-of-pocket costs, which are 65%, it's just kind of a monthly insurance payment instead of that potentially disastrous family spending on one person getting sick.
You've actually preempted my question there, Mr. Gates, because, as you said, India today is among those countries where the citizens have a very high out-of-pocket expenses. And therefore, this whole cost angle is, comes up over and over again. In fact, I was going through one of those research that the Gates Foundation had put out and said that between 2004 and 2014, 4% people were falling below the poverty line because they were not able to meet the expenses. what seems to be, I mean, going by, the sort of a global, the kind of, it's almost like global laboratory, like you have operations around the world. What seems to be like some of the learnings that India can embrace? And should the government lead, in a free market economy, should the government control pricing? That seems to be a very hot issue today. I mean, how do you look upon that?
Well, I'm a believer in capitalism, so the government shapes the market. And there's a base level of health, like controlling infectious disease, helping with pregnancy and vaccines, that an increase in spending there really can get some great results. Nutrition, maternal mortality. But there's a lot of diseases, these non-communicable diseases, where asking the government to play the only role there, that's probably not the efficient way to do it. And other countries, for those pieces, have used an insurance market. Now, even there, the government's got to make sure that the people are getting quality things. There are some government insurance programs, but they're fairly fragmented today. You want to make it attractive for people to come in and provide that insurance. And so you have to be careful, are you really enabling the market to do its job, which in insurance it absolutely can.
What is the role of the private sector? How can private sector play a role in this regard?
Well, in the Indian economy, like many, the private sector is dominant. It's much bigger than government. And even though as countries get richer, government can grow to be 30, even 35% of GDP, which would be double where it is today in India's case. That there will be growth as education and health and many things get more. It still leaves the private sector as the dominant actor. And so innovation in cheap vaccines, innovation in the right kind of food for supplemental feeding. If you get the private sector working, the talent here, the entrepreneurial nature, it's going to be fantastic. And we already see many examples of that, whether it's the vaccine companies, the computer services companies. If you get the right balance between government and private sector, that's when you get this huge liftoff to middle income.
What's interesting also, Mr. Gates, is that when you make this argument that countries need to do a lot more, need to invest a lot more in healthcare, this is also taking place at a time when the underlying economic structures are changing. There's more artificial intelligence, there's more automation. And in India, these issues are being looked at with a certain amount of trepidation because of what the implication could be on the jobs market. But you've said that if we invest more in healthcare, which means more productive workforce, and considering India has a younger population, that's going to benefit in the long run. Talk to me a little about that.
Well, one of the sectors that can use more people is the health sector, and that's at many levels of education, particularly as we empower them with a digital tool like a phone or a tablet that helps them keep track of things, helps them do their jobs, helps them communicate with the patients. The service sector, is going to grow very dramatically in India. The manufacturing sector should grow, but it's true with automation, it'll never grow to the level that it did in China. China had peaked at 30% of the workforce, and now it's down from that. India, in a sense, because it hasn't done global manufacturing much, it hasn't had that automation thing driving those jobs down. I do think India should have more manufacturing jobs, but services, including health, will be the dominant provider of these jobs that everybody knows is important.
So what would your message be to those, many of the neo-Luddites, as some are calling them, that who do not want, the technology progress to happen at the pace at which it's been going on? What would your message be? I mean, how could you allay some of their concerns?
Well, look at, what's happened over the last several hundred years. Life expectancy has more than doubled. Literacy is something we believe should be universal. The goods and services that we want to get everybody to have, air conditioning, refrigerators, all these wonderful things. Those are because of innovation. And so India still, to get everybody this middle-class lifestyle, we need to make things cheaper. And that's about innovation. Yes, software is part of that. Advances in medicine are part of that. Advances in material science. India has a lot to look forward to. The question is how quickly do we make it happen, and how equitably. Are there 20 or 30% of the population left behind or not? In the case of healthcare today, we still have a lot. India has a lot to do to help the very poorest with their health needs.
You mentioned that the private sector has a big role to play if India were to address the healthcare challenge, and I want you to address this issue, sir, because globally we are seeing public trust in businesses sort of going down. Not just businesses, we are seeing that happening with governments, even the media, and even with NGOs. What seems to be the problem, and how can businesses now play a bigger role, to sort of earn that trust back once again?
Well, the fact that people are more demanding before they trust something, there's nothing wrong with that. The fact is the revolution in communications mean people are seeing things. Actually trust in government, at least I don't know the India figures, but in the United States, the place that the trust has fallen the most is in government. And I think there are things that indicates that we need to do better. And so not being satisfied with the status quo, that's fine. In a market economy, new providers come in that earn the public's trust, and that means that they'll be the ones that thrive, they'll be the ones that create the new jobs.
But how do businesses then regain that trust back?
Well, by making great products at low prices. It's the admiration of what the public sector does. If you ask that broadly, it's very high. People, like the fact that almost all these goods, take cell phones as a kind of extreme example. That's kind of a magic thing, which now we're taking advantage of that to make digital payments, and so that the financial fees are dramatically lower, and people can get more advice about how to manage their money. So, companies are going to succeed here. This economy is going to grow. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And the biggest part of that will be these private sector players.
You've said that you have two careers. One is, of course, co-founder of Microsoft and as a co-chair of your foundation. And you've seen India as a country for quite some time now. As you sit here today, sir, and you look at the kind of progress or some of the initiatives the government has taken up, what is your view of the Indian economy in the long run?
Well, I have a very positive view of the direction India is going in. Our foundation here is to help accelerate, particularly in health and nutrition, where people should be a little bit dissatisfied that the speed hasn't been high enough. But there's just no doubt India's going to move to be a middle-income country. It's 1.3 billion people, so it's fantastic. 20% of the world's population here, and look at the health trends. They're good. I'm always impatient because if you look in the poorer states, they're not as good, and so some things are lagging where they might be, and we can learn from other countries, learn from the states that are doing slightly better than the others. But overall, this is a very positive picture. We have innovation on our side. India's a vibrant democracy with all the benefits and kind of wildness that comes with that. This is a country that will set an example for all the countries that are behind it. People really do look to India to provide this wonderful economic growth so that it's a great middle-income country.
When you speak, sir, people listen to you, and this interview will be seen by a lot of people, especially the decision makers, the policy makers. If there were 2 or 3 key suggestions that you would want to make to the government, going by your long association with the country, what would they be?
Well, my expertise in terms of work in India is mostly focused on health, and so there where we've seen new vaccines adopted, we've seen vaccine coverage go up. We can see that those investments, which are as a percentage of the economy very small, those are paying off, and so hopefully as we're driving these quality programs forward, both that public side will double as a percentage of GDP, and we'll find a way to get the private sector involved, primarily with insurance products, so that this out-of-pocket piece isn't there holding people back and creating gigantic inequities.
When you sit here, sir, today, I mean, what are some of the things, maybe some of the announcements the government has made in the recent past that has, that has excited you the most? There's a lot of talk about, a startup revolution in India. A lot of focus is being, put on sort of IT and IT-enabled services to actually ensure that the needy get the services that are meant for them, so that there are no leakages. Any specific things that you've been impressed by over the last few years?
Well, I think a lot of the openness to say, hey, we're behind on nutrition, hey, sanitation, there's a real problem. Mostly governments don't want to admit that, hey, there's still work to be done. And here, whether it's, saying, hey, let's clean up the Ganges, let's get it, so people have a great toilet that they can use, let's get the nutrition so these kids develop well. Being willing to have metrics on that. And really say, let's drive accountability and get various states almost competing to be the best in these things. That's a very positive dynamic. The government's going to have to step up some. Hopefully the GST gives it a basis that in some areas it can invest more.
All right. Bill Gates, thank you very much for your time. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, sir. Well, that was a big interview here on CNBC-TV18. That was Bill Gates in conversation with me. From all of us here, thank you very much for watching.